Live from Atlanta, Georgia, it's the Zach Ballinger Show, where we help you find your direction through passion and purpose. My name is Zach Ballinger. I'm your host. Thank you guys so much for going on. We've got another great addition to the Career Library today. 2 ways you can engage the show. We're actually streaming live via YouTube. If you have any questions, pop them into the comment box. We'll make sure to get to them. You guys can always email me throughout the year, zach@zachballinger.com. Enter those questions. We will make sure to get them to our guests. Rabbi Mike, thanks so much for joining the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, full disclosure, I've never talked to a rabbi before, so this is going to be pretty neat. But can you tell us a little bit about the career?
Sure. So first, I want to mention that every career as a rabbi might be a little bit different depending on which denomination you're speaking about, just like it would be in any other religion. You know, in the Christian denominations, there's differences between priests and pastors and those sorts of things. So I'm a member of the Reform movement, the Jewish Reform movement. So as a Reform rabbi, I can tell you about that career, and that way there would be slight differences for the conservative, Orthodox movements, that sort of thing. So I want to put that out there first. But in order to become a Reform rabbi, first you have to have an undergraduate degree. And you have to apply to a 5-year seminary program at a seminary, which I went to and most Reform rabbis go to, which is Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. As I said, it's a 5-year program. The first year is spent in Jerusalem in Israel, where you can learn Hebrew and explore the archaeological sites and really have an immersion to Jewish culture. The next 4 years you spend on one of the 3 campuses in the United States, New York, LA, or Cincinnati. I personally went through the Cincinnati campus. And in order to get accepted into seminary in this 5-year program, there is a Hebrew test. You're required to have college level Hebrew of 2 years to get in. A psychological evaluation where you meet with a psychiatrist to make sure that you're ready and what we would say psychologically available to be in such an auspicious position. And then finally, you have an interview with a group of members, such as the head of the school, a local rabbi, a student, a few professors, in which they really ask you difficult questions, because it is quite the commitment. 1, to go to school for 5 years, and 2, to enter into this kind of work, which certain people would call a calling, or, or depending on what kind of rabbi they wish to be, an academic world. Either way, it's a long-term commitment. And so they want to make sure that you're right for it and they're the right place for you.
Wow. Thanks for walking us through that. I did not realize that. So that's a lot of schooling. So you definitely need. How did you know that this was kind of a calling for you? When did you determine that, and how did you get there?
That's a great question. In fact, that's the question that they ask when you interview to become a rabbi is, when did you want to do this? How did you figure it out? I graduated from Boston University in 2004 with a psychology degree, and I worked in many of what we'd call the secular world for a few years. It wasn't until around 2008 that I decided that I wanted to become a rabbi. One, I realized that when I had gone to services that the Jewish world and Jewish academia and Jewish spirituality had always been a part of my life. And I realized that when I was going to services, I was living at the time in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it just sort of hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life, but this was a very steady idea from growing up in a Jewish household. But as I thought about it more, I realized that being a rabbi, and I think this extends over many denominations, is a job in which you wear many hats. You have to be in mental health. You speak to people and provide them pastoral care. You're a teacher, but you're also a student. There's a great deal of business administration and management. You're doing something new every day. You're not just sitting at a desk and typing all the time, but there is a lot of writing, of course. There's research and study. And so I realized that in my past, in the secular world, I was doing some of those things and was not feeling fulfilled. As a rabbi, you can feel fulfilled by having all of those aspects all at once. So it's a very on your feet sort of job. One day you're writing a sermon, the next day you're officiating a funeral, the next day you're training someone or tutoring a student, and then you have a wedding, and then you leave services. So it doesn't get monotonous, and it's not boring, and it's an emotional and challenging career, but it's very fulfilling and rewarding at the same time.
What do you might have answered this, but what do you love most about it?
I think for me, being a rabbi, the rabbi literally means teacher. And so I do love to teach, and that is my favorite thing. But when I realized through seminary the immense body of work that is Jewish thought, Jewish history, Jewish philosophy, theology, you are always learning. You have to keep on your toes. You can't get stagnant in terms of that, because if you do, then your congregants or your students will as well. And so for me, my favorite part is continuing to learn about things, whether it's the newest scholarship or new ideas and interpretations, and being able to share those with my students or congregants or whoever, because I have those aha moments like, wow, I never knew this. This is so exciting. And I get to pass that on to my students so that they are continually being rejuvenated and thinking, wow, that's so cool. I never knew that. And so it's an inspiring back and forth, being able to teach that sort of thing. I mean, being a teacher is wonderful no matter what you teach, but I think religion as a whole can be very personal to people. And so when you're teaching, people can be very inspired and transformed even by some of the things that you teach them, and it can change their outlooks and get them to think about new and different things. And I think that is absolutely has always been my favorite part of being a rabbi.
Oh, that's great. And you kind of mentioned this before, but you touched on there's a lot of challenges. So I always when I interview people, I like them to know, because careers can seem really cool on the surface to certain people. And then you say, well, what's some of the challenges? What's difficult about your job? I think it's good for the audience to know.
I think that is really good. One, I'll tell you that after the first year of seminary, about 10% will drop out. Because they realize that it's something different than they thought, just like anything else, right? If you see a lawyer on TV and you say, I want to be a lawyer, then you go to law school and you're like, wow, this is not what I thought it was. And so you have a lot of that. People who didn't realize the amount of work or didn't realize, the certain individual challenges that they might have. For those who make it, there are rabbis who don't last in certain aspects of what we call the rabbinate. If it's congregational rabbinate, chaplaincy, academia, those sort of things, there's all the routes to go to. And that has to do with your own individual skills. And that goes back to the amount of training and testing that goes in to make sure you can be a rabbi. So I'll give you an example. I personally have never been very good at what we would say sort of the politics of working with a board of directors. There's certain rabbis who are excellent at navigating that, being able to surround yourself with allies and help prep before you get a good idea and handle rejection and those sort of not manipulative, but ways to navigate and steer through the political world with money and clout and all those sort of things. That to me was, as a personality, very challenging for me. And it can be challenging for others too. And rabbis get burnt out by it. They get disillusioned by it. Others thrive in it and they're able to do great things. And so that for me was what led me out of the congregational world into the chaplaincy world and the academia world, where I now write books, because it just wasn't working for me. So sometimes you don't know when. I think that's clear in any career, but until you get going in it, you realize what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, to see if what those challenges are. But the good news is if one aspect of the rabbinate doesn't work, there are many others, right? There are, you can be what's called an assistant or associate rabbi, which means you work under a senior experienced rabbi, which means you're a little more sheltered to that. If that's not your style, you can go the solo route where you're in charge of everything, of a smaller congregation, and that comes with its own benefits and challenges. If the congregations don't work, there's hospital chaplaincy, military chaplaincy, all of that sort of pastoral care. And then there's, if you like teaching, there's going to get your PhD and becoming a professor. And then there's all kinds of other little ones in between, people who run Jewish summer camps or do other sort of nonprofit organizations. So as long as you have an idea of the fact that Judaism means a lot to you, you enjoy teaching, you enjoy studying, you're passionate about it, my guess is by the time you get out of a 5-year seminary, you're pretty locked in, and you just have to decide what your career is going to look like, and knowing that that may change as you grow as a person.
And that's one of my questions I was going to ask you. Let's say somebody's out there, they're a college student, and they're really close to the faith in Judaism, and they think this might be a career. How do they know? Do you recommend just everybody just try school and then you kind of is there any steps you can do before you even get there?
Absolutely. So one, I wouldn't recommend just trying out seminary. One, it's expensive. You uproot your life. It could be a fun first year, but it's, like I said, it's expensive and you don't want to waste anybody's time. What I did was, when I thought that this was something I wanted to do, was I started contacting the local rabbis in my area, and I told them this is what I thought I wanted to do. So they hired me on happily as an intern or as a religious school teacher, working under them, shadowing them a little bit. I went with a rabbi to career day when I was in high school, right? Getting an idea of what the day-to-day is, because I think, as you probably know, if you look at a career from a distance, you have sometimes no idea what they do every day, right? I'll be honest, when I started right before my first congregation, I called the rabbi who I was replacing and I said, "What do you do all day?" I literally had no idea. Even after 5 years of seminary, I didn't know what he did all day. And so I think that using that communication, having real conversations with people who are in the field, people who have been in the field 30 years, 10 years, 5 years, they're going to give you lots of different perspectives, because, as you know, careers change and the world changes, the industry changes, the sort of skills that you need, the sort of challenges that arise, right? Technology, all these sort of things. So that was something that I did. And so for a year or two before I entered seminary, I worked in synagogues, I worked in temples, and really listened to what the rabbis had to say. And I said to myself, eventually, I think I can do this. And they thought I could too. So again, those are the people who become your colleagues. They write your recommendations. They know what you might need going in, good advice, things like that. So establishing that is really the next step to do that. The other thing I'd recommend is that most successful rabbis, at least in the Reform movement, don't go from undergraduate straight into graduate seminary. The seminary likes you to have at least a couple years in between of living in the real world, so to speak, and understanding what it might mean to manage people or work in office environments or work environments or something like that, so that you're not going in just as a student to a student, and all of a sudden you come out and you're still very inexperienced in terms of working with people. Now, I will say that I have colleagues who are absolutely brilliant, and they went straight from undergrad into seminary. And while I was a rabbi starting at 29, they were 24, 23, but there's also second career rabbis who come in when they're in their 30s or 40s. Everyone can join at a different time. So that's another thing I'll say, is that if you don't think you want to do it now, but you might want to do it later, that's okay too. There are plenty of rabbis who join and go to seminary later in life because they realize this is really something that they want to do.
Wow, that's so helpful. I think that's great advice, even across the spectrum. If you look at the secular world, that's something I harp on is mentorships, job shadowing, interviewing people that are in that career. think so many times we just jump into a career, like you mentioned before, like law school. We see a nice commercial on TV and we don't really know what all it entails. So it's always good to practice to connect with people already in the field. What's something that you want? Let's rewind your life, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. Was there a dream career you always dreamed about doing?
4th, 5th, 6th grade. I may be a bit of an anomaly here because for a very long time, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And 4th, 5th, 6th grade was not an exception. I followed a path of sort of unknown, even through high school and college and afterwards, trying to figure out what it was that I was passionate about and inspired by. So I went to Boston University. I had no idea what I wanted to major in. I picked psychology because I come from a family of mental health professionals and it seemed good. When I graduated, I had no idea what to do with that psychology degree. But so I started working in the restaurant industry. I thought, oh, this is cool. I can be in management. Maybe I'll open up my own restaurant one day. Then I shifted that to wanting to be more in business administration. I ended up working for Enterprise Rent-A-Car and their management trainee program, which is a great program, by the way, for people who don't know what they want to do with their lives and aren't passionate about anything, because it's very hard to be passionate about rental cars. And eventually I found my way to sort of looking at, those years before me and saying, what was a constant in my life, right? I grew up in a Jewish household. We went to synagogue. I went to Jewish camp and Jewish youth group. And like I said, I went with my rabbi to career day. And I realized that was the constant stream of something I was passionate in. But it took me a long time to get there. 4th and 5th and 6th grade, I probably had no idea, or if I did, it was just the idea of something that I had thought about, whether, kids, we like, being an artist, or we see our teacher and we're like, oh, that's cool. Or, whatever our parents are doing. But for me, I wouldn't be able to give you a strong answer there.
No, I think you're not an anomaly at all. In fact, the people I talk to, this is a common theme that through people's life is that they don't really know what they wanted to do. But, I think a lot of times in this country, we don't do a great job of it in the high school and college level of educating people on career development. We send them there to do 2 things: get a career, make money, but we don't teach a personal finance or career development a lot of the times. So I don't think it's a common anomaly. In fact, when I grew up, I had no idea what I wanted to do either. I had some ideas, but I think you hit on something too. I always challenge people to look back at a constant theme in your life. What are some of your strengths, abilities, innate gifts? Sometimes it'll be in the mirror the whole time and we just can't find it. So very good example. The last question I had for you as far as the career libraries are concerned is you kind of mentioned it a little bit. I want you to go back through, because let's say somebody's doing a virtual preceptorship and they want to know kind of what a typical day looks like. You already explained that's going to be challenging to explain because every day is different, but just give us a stab at it. If somebody was with you this morning or, a work day, in the morning, and then they left with you at night, what does that kind of entail?
Sure. Yeah. And again, it depends where you are on the ladder. If you're an assistant or associate or senior or solo rabbi, I'll take you through, a day of being a solo rabbi at a small congregation. I was the only solo rabbi of a congregation of about 100 family units or so about maybe 250 people. So, a typical Monday morning, you come in, you realize that you have certain things to do during that week that you have to plan for. You're going to give a sermon on Friday, so you have to start thinking about what you're going to write about, which means what is going on in the text that you're supposed to read that week, but also what's going on in the world to see if you want to talk about those things. Saturday morning coming up, you've got to read Torah, which means you have to practice and look at the Torah portion to make sure you can read it, chant it, translate it, and talk about it. There are always phone calls that you have to make. People who are in the hospital, people who are going through loss or having problems, families of people who have died recently. You want to check in on them, make sure that everybody's okay. There are tutoring sessions that you have to prepare for. You're going to tutor bar and bat mitzvah students. You're going to teach confirmation. You're going to teach religious school. You have to prepare your curriculum for those sorts of things. And then, of course, you have meetings. Congregants want to meet with you for pastoral care. There's meetings with other people in the community. I did a lot of interfaith work, so I worked with other programs and other clergy. So you have to meet with them and plan those events. If you are involved in what we call sort of social justice or politically minded things, you have to be up on those issues that are going on, prepared perhaps to make a statement to the news. They like to come to rabbis and say what's going on, if something happens, whether it's a good thing or a tragedy that has occurred, unfortunately, or the anniversary of something. You have to make sure that you're on top of that as well. And then you have to have your own time for self-study to make sure, as we said earlier, to make sure you're still learning stuff and ready to teach your adult education classes that you have to do, your Torah study classes. And then somewhere in there you eat, if you're able to. And then you probably, it's not a 9-to-5 job, right? You can go as late into 9 o'clock in the evening if there's evening events, or if there's classes that you're teaching, or if there's an event that's happening. So you have to plan that as well. What are you going to do in order to do that? And I think that depending on the day, right, you might actually go out a little bit. You might go to the hospital to visit a congregant. You might go out to have a meeting with one of the local organizations, perhaps a food pantry or those sort of things, to see how you can be helpful or what's going on. So there is a lot of what we would say self-propelled organization that you have to do and figure out what your schedule is. I have colleagues who, when they are asked to do something, as a rabbi, you're always asked to do things. They write it down, they put it in a little piece of paper, and they have an egg carton, and they put that in that paper. And if it gets filled up, the next time someone asks something, you have to say no, because there's too much already on your plate. But you have to balance your own in terms of yeses. I was always a yes rabbi. If a colleague called and said, hey, I need you to do this, or whatever it is, sure, great. But you can also overwhelm yourself that way. So the day of a rabbi, certainly a solo rabbi, is all about organizing your week and checking things off the list. And unfortunately, planning for the unexpected. If you've got your week completely planned out, and God forbid one of your congregants dies, you have a funeral to plan, you have a eulogy to write, you have intake to do, and that completely messes up the whole schedule. So a daily life of a rabbi is hoping that your schedule that you've made for yourself for the week works, and then realizing it probably won't.
This has been such a helpful interview. I think anybody that's interested in this particular line of work, this interview is really, because of your great insights and thoroughness on each question, really help shape the way that people can look at this. So I greatly appreciate it. Now, you've got a lot going on behind the scenes. I know there's a podcast and some books. Can you shine a light on kind of what you're doing behind the scenes?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So yes, I do have a podcast. It's called A Priest and a Rabbi Walk Into a Bar. And it's me, Rabbi Mike, with a dear friend of mine and colleague of mine, an Episcopal priest. And he and I, in addition to loving interfaith dialogue and looking at things from a Jewish and Christian point of view and seeing the similarities and differences, we also like beer. So we go to local breweries. We're always happy to promote those small businesses and local breweries and things like that. We try the beer, we drink it, and over a good glass of beer, we talk about issues. We talk about theological, philosophical, textual issues that perhaps we have some things in common, or what are the little differences between how a Jew and a Christian would view certain things. And we have a lot of fun, and it's very laid back. So that you can find on Apple Podcasts. I do have 2 books coming out. One book is coming out later this year. It's a children's book called Rabbis Are People Too, which shines a light on the humanity of rabbis, that we have emotions, we have lives outside of the synagogue, in order to try to raise a new generation of congregants who don't feel that there's such a distance between them and this supposed pillar of the community who is unbreakable and infallible, which we are not. We're normal people, we're humans. And we do get angry and frustrated and sad. And so my goal is working with this Jewish publisher, Byte, to let people know that, you can relate to a rabbi. Rabbis are not something that is untouchable. We're people just like you are, and that should be a stronger connection between a rabbi and his or her congregants or students. And then later in July 2022 with Fortress Press, I have a book coming out called You Should Know More About Us. And that stemmed from when, like I said, I did a lot of interfaith work. I would have great many colleagues and friends in the Christian world who would call me all the time and ask questions about their texts or my text or these sort of things. And it led me to write this book, which was not a Judaism 101 book. There's plenty of things out there if you want to learn about Judaism. What this is really a handbook for Christian clergy and lay people to try to avoid what I call accidental landmines, things that Christians might do that might offend Jews, certain texts that they should be aware of that might be a little more problematic than they thought, and showing our Christian friends how to enrich their faith with a little bit more of Jewish connection that they might not have known in first century Judaism when Jesus was around, and the influence later. And so that is my hope, that it would hopefully sit on the shelves of every Christian clergy and say, if they're going to do something and it mentions Jewish people or something like that, they look in the book and say, oh, I better say this from the Jewish perspective, just to make sure that we're showing respect and that sort of thing. So besides that, I also have a YouTube program called Teach Me Judaism, which you can find on YouTube. It's an animated YouTube program that talks about some of the more complex and scholarly aspects, higher register issues of Judaism, because during my time in the congregational world, I noticed there was such a gap of knowledge between me, the rabbi, and my congregants. And there's so much to learn outside the normal sort of basic stuff that you've heard over and over and over again. These are the big aha moments that I had and wanted to pass on. They're done in a way so that anyone can understand them. And at the very least, whether you agree with them or not, from a scholarly point of view, it gets you thinking about it. So those are all my sort of passionate projects that I took out of the congregational world that I wanted to still contribute to as I move and transition out of that.
It's great. Thank you so much. Guys, if you're out there listening and you're interested in further, Rabbi Mike's been a great resource. Check out some of those podcasts, the books that he's got out and that are coming up. Thank you again for doing this. We really appreciate the information. It's been so helpful, not only from the faith standpoint, but from a career side as well. So we appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
And everybody, thank you guys for listening. This is the Zach Ballinger Show.